Terry and I do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose. Just some housekeeping items related to CE and credit instructions. We will get this dropped in the chat, but just a reminder, your evaluation will need to be completed within 30 days. And then credit is usually awarded within 60 days of the webinar. If there are any questions that arise after this webinar, please reach out to Raven Jackson, who is our continuing education chair, and we'll share this information again towards the end. So just a few quick objectives. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we will define what a resolution is and its purpose. We'll talk about the relevant sections of a resolution, as well as go through crafting a resolution. And also very, very important, we'll talk about the resolution review process, including the vote and approval by the House of Delegates. So when we look at a resolution, I think it's important to just understand that it is a special main motion. So when we discuss parliamentary procedure in July, it'll be more clear that this is a motion. It's really a method that we use to introduce an item of business before the House of Delegates. It's a formal statement, and so it states some sort of will or intent or an action of the association. It normally will address some sort of problem, a situation, or a concern. It is actually very, very effective in the way in which it directs or suggests some sort of call of action. And so if you have a chance to look at any of the resolutions on the NAPA website, you'll notice that some of them have a specific call of action that either it's an initiative that we want to develop. And so I'll show some examples of those later in these slides. It is a motion, but it's submitted in writing, and then it is adopted by the membership delegates. And so as Ryan said, we are currently taking and if you have not received that email, let us know, but we are looking for delegates for our House of Delegates meeting in July. Its purpose is really to provide the direction for the NAPA board. So it helps guide our organizational efforts. It helps us formalize and focus our position on a various important and relevant issues. And the best way to think about it is these are issues that impact not only our members, but potentially pharmacy practice and the patients we serve. When we talk about resolutions, if you participate in any other House of Delegates or the NAPA House of Delegates, you may also hear the term position or policy statement. And just as a reminder, these do not have to be resolutions, but they are a way in which we can bring an item in front of the House of Delegates. I think the other part to remember is many times our resolutions are helping inform NAPA's advocacy. And so what are the things that we support, and then how do we support them? When we look at the resolution categories with NAPA, some of our past categories, as you can see, vary. So we have some that are associated with education and licensure and kind of how do we guide or what do we support for pharmacy education, all the way to patient care and counseling, as well as professional practice. We have several that are associated with technology and support services, and then there are some third-party associated resolutions. If you're new to the House of Delegates or have not visited the NAPA website, so you can find the resolution information online. This is a great place to go, especially if you're looking for resolutions that need to be updated or amended. If you go to the NAPA website, you will choose advocacy. And then when you choose resolutions, you'll notice there on the screen, we have our categories. When you click details, it will actually show our resolutions all the way back to, I believe, 2016, 2017. This is also a great place for you to see our NAPA bylaws, as well as some feature resolutions that we adopted in 2020. So what does a resolution look like? So here's a few examples. So in 2020, NAPA and SNAPA, and we'll talk about the process of SNAPA resolutions in just a little bit. But you'll notice that all of our resolutions are a combination of our NAPA and SNAPA support. And if you look at the 2020 resolution, I think this is a good example. So this is a resolution related to fatal opioid overdoses and the dispensing or co-prescribing of naloxone, particularly for prescriptions that exceed 7 days of continuous use. And so depending on what state you're in, I know in Arkansas, we just had a new regulation that we're required for certain patient populations to co-prescribe naloxone. So again, as you look at what's happening from a national perspective and things that impact our pharmacy practice, but also our patients, this is a very good example. I also like to highlight the 2017.23 resolution. And so this one was actually around, this was actually a SNAFA resolution that was approved through their House of Delegates and then approved by the NAFA House of Delegates. And it's all related to mental health and available health services, medication therapy, the promotion of pertinent issues, and then just fostering international partnerships. And out of this resolution, SNAFA now has a resolution or initiative associated with mental health. And so all of our SNAFA chapters across the nation have the opportunity to participate in different service projects that deal with mental health. So just an example of putting a resolution into action. So quick knowledge checkpoint polling question before we get into, I just want to get some background to see what you guys know about resolutions. So true or false, resolutions are written to change an organization's bylaws. And you can drop your answer in the chat if you believe it's A would be true or B would be false. Awesome. So correct, everyone in the chat, I believe, chose B. So no, resolutions are not written to change an organization's bylaws. So we'll kind of go through the process of resolution approval, as well as Terry's going to cover for us how we write a resolution.
Before you leave that slide, you're all correct that this is false. What is done to change an organization's bylaws? Can anyone guess what that is? What would you call that? Well, I don't know if anyone's putting it. Yes, I see. Yeah, it's an amendment. That's how you change your bylaws. You change them through the amendment process. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. So great, thanks.
And we also are, in addition to resolutions, you can submit bylaws amendments through that link that was sent out via email. Thanks, Terry. So we're going to talk about this in more detail, but when we look at the resolution process, of course, step one is you want to identify an issue and also research it. You'll draft a resolution. And so we're going to spend quite a bit of time just going over how you craft a resolution. As you guys know, we're in the process of resolution submission, and then we'll talk about the review process as well as the adoption process. So when we look at the NAFA process, of course, we are in the middle of our call for resolutions. Per our bylaws, these have to be submitted within 30 days prior to the annual meeting. So that due date is June 29th of this year. Those resolutions are then reviewed by the NAFA Resolutions and Bylaws Committee, and they'll be presented to the Board of Directors. And then subsequently in July, during our House of Delegates, they will be reviewed and presented there. Much of the work around resolutions occurs, of course, at the House of Delegates. Sorry, I'm having a delay in my slides. There we go. I did want to briefly cover the SNAFA process. So if you are a SNAFA member, attended a SNAFA meeting, if you're a SNAFA advisor, you're probably familiar with this process. But our SNAFA chapters across the nation will submit resolutions. They actually get Chauncey I. Cooper points associated with those resolution submissions. Those resolutions are then reviewed and approved during their House of Delegate meetings during their regional conference. Those approved resolutions then go on to the SNAFA House of Delegates at the national meeting. They're presented there and then they're approved. The final step of that is that they are actually brought to the NAFA House of Delegates where they're presented and then presented for adoption. So I think it's important to recognize that the NAFA House of Delegates will actually do the final approval or adoption process for our SNAFA resolutions. And I'm always really amazed and excited about the SNAFA resolutions just because you can usually tell the students that put a lot of thought and are actually very, very attuned to where practice is or where they would like practice to go. I think it's important to understand for the bylaws resolution committee, we do have some criteria that we utilize to review resolutions. Really, resolutions again need to relate to the education, our safety or welfare of our members, as well as our pharmacy practice or public health. They should align with the purpose and mission of NAFA, and you can find that in our bylaws. They really should concern a national matter, and that would actually, if particularly those that are called to action, that it would require nationwide focus as well as action. I think the other thing to remember is that it really states a position that maybe has not previously or should not have previously been adopted by NAFA. And just to kind of clarify, that does not mean that you cannot update or amend an already adopted resolution. And so we see from year to year commonly that that's actually what occurs, particularly on the NAFA side. So once the resolutions have been presented and approved by the NAFA Board of Directors, they are then sent to our NAFA House of Delegates at the convention for consideration. At that point, the resolutions can then be amended, and we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slides, as well as debated. The resolution is then put to a vote, just like we would do any other motion. And then if it's adopted by the House of Delegates, it is then a finalized resolution of NAFA. So what happens after that? So these adopted resolutions are posted on the NAFA website. They help inform our policy development. Like I said, they also are usually a lot of times, for particularly the ones that are clinical in nature, help drive our national initiatives. And then, you know, they are one and not the only way, but they are a method to help drive our advocacy. So we're going to do a quick polling question. So CNN calls the NAFA president for a quote on NAFA's position on police brutality. The president will review which of the following prior to responding: the NAFA bylaws, B, an email to the board of directors for consensus, C, NAFA's resolution on police brutality and violence, D, A, and C, or E, all of the above. You guys still see my screen?
You need to go back.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. The answers are coming in. Oh, they're different. We have a kind of mixture of thoughts.
Does anybody want to unmute? Brian, are they able to unmute?
If you want to raise your hand and maybe explain your answer, someone who said E. Kendra, can you unmute because you're, I mean, maybe, I'm trying, do we see any hand raises?
I don't in the participants unless they have their cameras on.
I see someone named Tammy. I'm gonna try and unmute her.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, how are you? So I just think that you would want to do a thorough review before answering something that's national that will represent the organization. So that's why I said E.
Okay. Anybody who said D? Everybody's been shy.
Let's see, I don't see any hands up for D. Let's see who answered D. Let's look in the chat. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but we're interested in how you came to your decision. Let's see, Julie.
Corey, are you willing to unmute? Oh, I see you raising
see.
your hand.
Yeah. And then there's, I'll unmute Newsome.
All right, Corey, you should be unmuted now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The reason why I came to the conclusion of D was that as the president of NAFA, he or she would be the face of the organization, and so I think that would be within their duties to answer, so long that it's within the bylaws and within our resolutions that we have. And so I didn't think that for this particular instance, they would need to email the board of directors for consensus, because that would be within their rights to answer. That's why I went with D.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Corey. I think because of the bylaws and the resolutions that are passed, that's kind of already the consensus of the organization in itself. So you wouldn't necessarily have to email the board of directors, because that's the way I view it. That's kind of the point of having these resolutions and bylaws, is so the organization can appear united on various topics or matters. And so then as the president, as long as she or he are well informed of what the role or stance of NAFA is, they can make a very educated response about what NAFA feels about police brutality.
Okay, thank you guys. Great discussion. So I will say, Tammy, your answer is not wrong. I guess first, our NAFA bylaws don't necessarily require the NAFA president to gather consensus from the board of directors, particularly where we have a resolution in place. And so if you guys have not had a chance to read our resolution on police brutality and violence that was passed in 2020, it does clearly outline the position of NAFA. And so as the NAFA president, he could go to that resolution and clearly represent the organization based on the passing of that resolution through our House of Delegates during our 2020 meeting. If, for example, he didn't have a resolution to rely on, we would then imagine that he would then contact the board of directors for some sort of consensus. And the hope would be, out of that, we would then put a resolution together. So we would craft a resolution based on that, probably that topic, to bring before the House of Delegates. Does that make sense to everyone? That was a good discussion. I'm gonna unmute all of you guys.
Yeah. Let's go for it.
All right, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Terry Moore, and she's going to walk through crafting a resolution.
Great, thank you. Before I get started on kind of the nuts and bolts of resolution, I just want to kind of put this in context. I've been a registered parliamentarian for probably the past 4 years and have been a intentional student of parliamentary procedure for probably about 10 years. I believe that parliamentary procedures, Robert's Rules of Order, are just very important in terms of helping an organization to operate as effectively as possible by having places where things can be made very clear, where things can be done consistently, where the voice of the majority is heard. And those are important things when you say, well, why does Robert's Rules say we should do things a certain way? It's for those reasons and more, which we will explore at our next webinar in July. And so one of the things for those of you who are perhaps interested in just how can you become a more intentional student of parliamentary procedures, there is an organization called the National Association of Parliamentarians, NAP. And in order to become a member of that organization, you have to take an exam. I'm in the process currently of helping those individuals who want to become a member to prepare for the exam to become a member. And then you continue studying and you get to a point where you sit for another series of exams to become what's called a registered parliamentarian. That's what the RP stands for behind my name. And then you can go one more level in the parliamentarian space and become what's called a professional registered parliamentarian, a PRP, which requires additional examination as well as practical demonstration of your ability to function as a parliamentarian. I just find that being in organizations and being able to really help organizations conduct their meetings effectively, conduct their business effectively is what you get to do as a parliamentarian. So just to put in context why we are making sure that MPHA and SNAFA, that we as an organization follow the guidelines of parliamentary procedures and Robert's rules. And so when it comes to a resolution, I don't want people to think that you have to use a resolution to bring business to the assembly or to the body for consideration and vote. As Kendrea said, a resolution is a special type of main motion. It's typically one that is long and complicated. Let's say, for example, you want to introduce a new item of business and it has a lot of reasons behind it. There's background to it. You want to use the resolution format because you want to be able to share that background and that reasoning so that those who then will have to consider and vote on the item that you want to be considered have the same information, have full information. And so one of the first parts of a resolution is that background and reasons. It's put in what we call a preamble. However, it is not required. It's just usually beneficial, especially when, like I said before, the thinking behind the business item that you want action to be taken on is complicated, or it's long, or it's complex, and you just want to make your position clear through the preamble. And then the second part of the resolution is what's called a resolving clause, and that's actually the motion or the recommendation for what should be the action that should be taken or the position that should be taken. And so we're now going to look at how do we build these two parts of a resolution in the correct manner according to Robert's Rules of Order. So next slide, please. So the first part is the preamble, and there is a correct way of writing a preamble. So preamble is that background piece that typically starts with statements that say whereas. If you look and you see how it is written there, it starts with a capital W and there's a comma behind the word whereas, and then the rest is the clause that you're using to give some reasoning or background information. The preamble part, the whereas clause does not contain any periods. Each of the clauses of a preamble ends with a semicolon instead. And if there's a series of clauses, then it would include the word and after the series of semicolons. And then when you get to the next to the last statement of the whereas series, you would put the word and. And then after the last statement in the preamble, before you go into the resolving clause, you want on that line to put the word therefore, or you can use the wording therefore, comma, be it, or you can use noun, comma, therefore, comma, be it. And any of those are what are called kind of transitional phrases into the resolving clause. Now, one thing you'll notice is that when you put your therefore be it, or noun therefore be it, there is no punctuation at the end of that. And then those words that are there in red, the transitional therefore phrases, are never at the beginning of the resolving clause. So let's talk about the resolving clause. Next slide. So now we move from the preamble to the part that states the action that's to be taken. That part of a resolution starts with the word resolves. It doesn't start with the word be it, or it doesn't start with the word therefore. Those words are going to be on the tail end of the background, the whereas clauses. The words resolved should be either in italics followed by a comma, or underlined followed by a comma. And then the rest of the phrase, it states the action to be taken. If there are, and then after the words resolve, comma, and whether it's in italics or underlined, then after the comma is the word that, and it's capitalized. So the beginning of your resolving clause should be resolved, comma, that, and then the action to be taken. Now, and oftentimes there are multiple resolving clauses, and if there are multiple clauses, each of them should start the same way. Should start with the word resolved, and then the word that, and the rest of the action to be taken. And each of them in that case would be different. When you have multiple resolving clauses, just like with the whereas clauses, you put a semicolon, and then you put the word and, or you can put and be it. Sometimes you'll see the words further resolved when there are multiple resolving clauses. And when you get to the very last one, then that is where it closes with a period. Now, I'm sure you all are going, ooh, that's a whole lot of details, but that is the correct way of writing the resolve clauses. And if you look even on the website, you'll see our past resolutions are written in a format that is not quite in compliance with Robert's rules, but that's okay. That's why we're learning now, and in the future, we'll have them in the correct format. So now let's look at, one other thing before we leave that slide. Go back 1 minute. One of the things to keep in mind when you're even thinking about what you want to present as a resolution, we now have the background, the whereas clauses, and then we know we're going to have our resolving clause or clauses that tell us what action we're recommending to be taken. You don't want that preamble part, the whereas, to take away from the actual resolving statements or clauses. And so think about not having too many of those whereas clauses. I've seen some resolutions where they might have 5, 6 whereas clauses and only 1 resolving clause. The background then kind of overpowers the resolution. So that's something to think about, because if that's the case, then you may want to rewrite the resolution, or maybe even divide it up if there's that much that you think needs to be stated. So next slide. So now, one of the things that oftentimes can happen when a resolution is brought before an assembly and it is presented like any other motion, it's brought forward by using the language, I move for the adoption of the resolution, and then you proceed with reading the whereas clauses, and then conclude with the actual resolving clause. So someone presents that the resolution as a motion. If it comes from the, in our case, the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, it doesn't require a second. And then that means now it's open for discussion. It's open for debate. And oftentimes, that's when someone in the assembly or in the delegates will say, well, I want to suggest a change. I want to suggest something a little bit different than what was in the original motion. That's when it's proper order to propose an amendment. So an amendment, and this is not just with regard to resolutions, but an amendment is what is called a subsidiary motion. It's second to a main motion. An amendment requires a motion in order for it to be considered. So you have to start off by saying, I move to amend, and then we'll go into what you would say after that. But once you put that motion to amend out there, it does require a second because it's coming from an individual member of the assembly. That second, the person who seconds that motion isn't saying that they agree with the amendment. They're just saying, I'm okay to have the assembly consider it. I'm okay to hear more about it. Oftentimes people think when someone seconds any motion, that means that they agree with the motion, and that's not what a second really represents. It's just saying, okay, let's talk about it, which means then an amendment, just like a main motion, is debatable. It's open for discussion. And then in order for an amendment to be adopted, it requires a majority vote of those who are eligible to vote. So an amendment can apply to words, it can apply to phrases, sentences, or paragraphs. The proposed changes or modifications that would come about from an amendment can be to either delete a word, phrase, or sentence, can be by striking out, let's say, certain words and inserting others, or striking out a phrase and inserting another phrase or word. It can be in the form of adding new language that wasn't in the original resolution, or it can come in the form of a total substitution where an entire paragraph can be substituted for what was originally proposed, or the whole entire motion may be substituted for something brand new. But substitution is really one of the modifications that is rarely, or recommended, that is rarely used because it typically is like a total change from what the original motion was about. But it does allow for that because sometimes that's what's necessary. So let's now go to the next slide. So there's a resolution, your main motion, and someone makes a motion to amend it. That amendment is seconded, it's debated, but it's not yet voted on. Someone else in the assembly wants to amend that first amendment. And we're going to go into an example in just a minute. Well, an amendment can be further amended, and that's what's called a second order of an amendment, but that's as far as it can go. You can't just keep amending and amending without stopping for a vote. And so amendments are then voted on before the main motion. And then in the case of resolutions, the resolving clause is voted on before amending any part of that preamble. So now with all of that, let's put this in context and look at some examples, which I think is the next slide. So here is a resolution that starts, you can see the preamble. Whereas NPHA offers a 1-year complimentary membership to new graduates who hold SNAFA membership, therefore be it, that ends the preamble. The resolving clause starts with resolved that NPHA membership committee should determine the impact on the organization if the complimentary membership is extended to 2 years. So that's your preamble and your resolving clause. It's put out as a motion. If it comes from a committee, it doesn't need to be seconded. And so now it's time to let's talk about it. So someone says, well, I don't think it should be extended to 2 years. I think it should be extended to 5 years. So they make a motion to amend by striking the word "to" and replacing it with 5. That's how they would, that's the amendment. That would get seconded. And then you could have some discussion. Oh, I think 2 years is enough. You're going to have people who want to stick with that. Others will want to plead their case for why it should be 5 years, why it should be longer. What do we then do at that point in time? You have your resolution, and then you have an amendment. Your presiding officer is then, or your Speaker of the House, in our case, who presides over the House of Delegates, will then say, okay, it's time to vote. We're going to call for the question, and we're going to vote on that amendment. So the first round of votes would be whether the wording "to" would be replaced with 5 years. So you take a vote, and the amendment to change 2 to 5 years does not get a majority vote, which means that that amended language does not go forward. And so the resolving clause remains as originally written, with the wording extended to 2 years. At that point, if there are no additional amendments, because someone could come back at that point with another amendment on somewhere else in that resolving clause. But let's assume there are no more recommended or no more amendments are brought forward. Then now it's time to vote on this resolution. And again, the resolution will pass with a majority vote. Let me just stop here before I go any further and see if there are any questions.
Hey, Terry, I think Marcia had a question.
Okay.
I think we missed her hand earlier. And I will unmute her.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I did have a question from when you first got started, when you were given the background about being a registered parliamentarian and the different levels or the different procedures that you have to go through to get certified. And
Yes.
I wanted to know, I realize the benefit that it serves an organization, especially when you're a part of the organization, but I was curious, does having that distinction, is that considered a marketable skill? Could you then be a consultant for another organization that you may not necessarily belong to?
Yes, it does allow you to market your credential, because in order to maintain that credential, in order to continue being a member of the association, you do have to keep up your continuing education and demonstrate that you are constantly kind of learning. It's an area that you want to use the skill. So yes, you could market yourself as a parliamentarian or just someone who assists organizations with their governing documents. That's something that I often do, is I will work with other organizations to write or revise their bylaws. And I also sit as parliamentarian currently for 2 other organizations. And I can put my information in the chat if anyone is interested in learning more about that. We can talk more offline.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
Dr. Moore, before you
Oh.
go on,
Okay,
so 2 things. First, I am interested in that, so I would definitely love to have your information. Well, I do have your number, but I'll there's some information in the chat, and I'll definitely get with you on that. But I just wanted to clarify that that after the resolved, that's always capitalized.
yes.
Okay, that was my clarification.
Okay, yep. Anything else? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, not that, this one, yes. So this is an example where I would say, help me, help me, help me. This resolution needs some help. And so I want you all to take a minute to look at it. And then we're going to go through and dissect what can we do to make this resolution correct, that we can, there's some areas on in this resolution as written that are incorrect and can be strengthened. So I'll give you all just 30 seconds or so to read through it, and then we'll go through it together. And I just put my contact info in the chat. Okay. All right, let's, let me just watch our time. So let's go through this resolution together. You've been asked to look at this resolution. Let's say you're on the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. This is what gets submitted. And you're now having to look at it to say, in addition to the committee looking at a resolution for content, and does it apply, does it support the mission and all the things that Kendrea mentioned, but you also want to look to see if it's in the right format, if it's correctly written. So you can raise your hand, come off mute. Let's start with the first bullet point that reads, whereas SNAFA supports the safety and well-being of pharmacists, safety protocols are necessary to ensure protection against pharmacy crimes, comma.
Can I speak?
Yes, Tammy, go right ahead.
So whereas should be capital and have a comma.
Okay.
Then instead of a comma after pharmacist, it should have a semicolon. But I do have a question. Should the and be before or after the semicolon?
The comma after pharmacist is actually correct.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Because
So that's part of the first part?
Because it's SNAFA supports the safety and well-being of pharmacists. That's one clause. Then you go back, and so it's changing to say it supports the safety and well-being of pharmacists. It's like whereas safety protocols are necessary to ensure protection. So that comma is separating that clause, safety and well-being of pharmacists, from the safety protocols are necessary clause.
Okay.
Anything else in
Okay.
that first one? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Anything before we go to the second bullet?
Hey, you should be
Yes.
unmuted now, I believe.
Okay. Should the comma after crimes be a semicolon?
Yes. Yes. So that's good. So there are 3 things in just that one that need to be corrected. So then the next bullet point, which is the next part of the preamble, Whereas student pharmacists may be involved in a pharmacy-related crime during their academic career. And that is the last clause of the preamble. So is there anything that we need to modify with that bullet? I see Tammy's hand. I can't see if anyone else's hand is up. So Tammy, go for it. After you unmute.
Sorry, I have a technical difficulty. I did see Jay Newsom's hand up, so I don't want to try to answer if he wants to answer.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So I'm looking and I believe that it should end with therefore. So it doesn't have a therefore at the end.
Okay. So where would you put the therefore, and what would it look like?
You know what? And be it further. Sorry, I'm looking at. I guess it's fine, but I guess it's fine.
So you can put behind the word career, as I think you were suggesting, you can put the word therefore,
Okay.
or you could put the wording therefore, comma, be it.
Okay.
You have a couple of options, but the point is when you transition out of that preamble into the resolving, then you want to put at least the word therefore.
Okay.
So let's look at the third bullet, where it starts with, be it resolved, SNAFA encourages pharmacies to incorporate safety protocols, procedures, and devices to ensure the security of all pharmacy personnel, patients, and products, and be it further. And then it goes to another resolving clause, but let's just look at the third bullet one. Is there anything that needs to be modified there?
I think I may be wrong. Is it supposed to have like resolved but be in italics? Or is it be it resolved okay, but still supposed to be in italics?
Okay. The italics part is correct.
Mhm.
Let me ask you this. Should that start with the word be it?
I think it should just start with resolved, right?
Anyone else want to agree or not to that? But you're correct. And I apologize because I can't see everyone. So if, yeah, I see if you want to put it in the chat, that's perfect. So be it would then need to go on the as the transition phrase from the preamble. So it would go, we already said we would put the word therefore after career. And if we want to use be it, it would go on that same line with therefore. This third bullet, it's the first of the resolving clauses, should start with the word resolved, capitalized, and it can be italicized or underlined. Most of the time you see it italicized. So what else needs to happen, if anything else, in that third bullet? Or if we move be it and capitalize and italicize resolved, is it down good to go? Tammy?
Okay. So it should have a comma and have that, capitalize that prior to SNAFA.
Correct. So the resolving statement starts with the word resolved, comma, and then the word that. Good. Otherwise, I think it's okay. Let's go to the fourth bullet that says resolve that SNAFA supports annual safety training through independent and community pharmacies, as well as the PharmD curriculum to prepare students to handle these situations safely. Any thoughts on that bullet?
Crystal, are you willing to speak up? I see you dropped. I see you're participating in the chat.
Okay, I couldn't unmute, sorry.
There you go.
Got it.
Okay, all right, so it should be resolved, comma, capital that SNAFA supports the annual safety training through independent and community pharmacists, comma.
So what did you change? What
So
do you-
I moved the comma,
We moved the comma, okay.
yeah.
Yep.
Moved the comma to end resolved,
Okay.
resolved, comma, that, capital that.
Correct. So anybody else, anything else in this clause that you would suggest modifying? And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. There's an opportunity that I would suggest for an amendment. Look at some of the content preceding that clause and see if there's anything you might suggest that would be amended. You give up yet? You still thinking? Let's see. Anyone have anything in the chat? Okay, I'll go ahead and share. When you read that, when I read that last part that says to prepare students to handle these situations safely, the first thing that came to mind is what students are we talking about? And then do we want to prepare anybody else in addition to students to handling these situations safely? And so I would recommend an amendment. And let's just go to the next slide because then you can see all the corrections. I would make a motion to amend that, make an amendment by striking students and replacing it with the phrase student pharmacist and pharmacists, to be consistent with what we've talked about before. We've reflected students, student pharmacists, and pharmacists. So that would be a possible amendment that I think would just help strengthen the content as well as make it read a bit more consistently. But you can see, other than my typo at the end of the second clause where I didn't complete the word therefore, you can see where all of the other suggestions you made were correct. So good job. So let's go to the next slide, which is a knowledge check and polling question as we're coming up on time. So the first question is, how many times can an amendment to a resolution be amended before a vote is required? You can put a number in the chat. Two. Yeah, the number, that's correct. It can be amended 2 times. Great. The next question, the preamble is a required part of a resolution, true or false? That is correct. It's false. It is not required. It's optional. And then the last question is, there should be at least 2 resolving clauses, true or false? false is correct. There's no requirement that there's a minimum of 2 resolving clauses. There should be at least 1. That's it for the knowledge check. You all did a great job. And I think the next slide is any questions? What other questions do you all have for either Kendra or me? Or we'll take comments as well. Let's see, there's a question. Does NPHA have any resolutions that do not have a preamble?
Not that I'm aware of. What I would say is more commonly, most of our resolutions will have some sort of preamble. What you will see on the website will be the resolve statement.
And that's typically how once a resolution has been adopted, you typically do not make the background or preamble information public. You don't make that part of your public facing resolution. It's the actual action that now should be taken. That's what you're going to see as a resolution.
Terry, you should be unmuted now.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to know if I can listen to this entire presentation again, because I'm too distracted here. I'm trying to work and at the same time listen. And as a delegate, I really want to be well informed. So is there any way that I can get more information, Terry? I guess I'll reach out.
This session is being recorded. I'm not sure how it will be made available. Maybe I thought someone was going to speak on that.
I'll jump in. This is Ryan. So this is a recorded session, and it will be shared with all of our delegates, as well as our non-delegate attendees who just would like to have more information on the resolution writing process. So it'll be shared. Since you registered for this event, it'll be shared with you for sure.
All right, thank you so much.
So as you're thinking about any additional questions, let's go to the last slide, I think, Kendra. There's some more information we want to share with you. So just a reminder that if you want to submit any resolutions or bylaw changes by way of bylaw amendments for the upcoming House of Delegates, you have until June 29th to submit those resolutions. And if you still have not signed up to be a delegate, there's still time to sign up to serve as a delegate in the House of Delegates. That deadline period to sign up has been extended to June 24th, which is tomorrow.
Corey, did you have a question?
Yes. Regarding bylaw changes, as I understand, and correct me someone if I'm wrong, members of the body aren't eligible to submit bylaw changes per NAFA bylaws. And if we are, will there be another session that kind of covers bylaw amendments as we're able to do so?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but our bylaws allow for members to submit bylaw amendments. And so in your email, if you're receiving the NAFA updates, there is a link within those updates where you can then access a Google form to submit those amendments. And then those amendments are reviewed by the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee and took to the Board of Directors. And we actually do present those at the House of Delegates for vote.
Okay, because I think unless I'm doing it wrong, when you do select the bylaw amendment option in that forms, it doesn't give you an option to kind of specify what that bylaw amendment or bylaw change you want it to be. And I think that might just be my user error. So if someone can help me with that, that would be amazing.
Okay, let me see if Angela, are you still on?
She may not be able
She
to
may not
come
be.
off mute. Or she
Corey,
may-
I'm gonna put my email in the chat. And I'll reach out to Angela as well to make sure that our form is set up correctly.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
And actually, I'll just put my ACH.
And so on this slide, you see the information again on how to receive CE credits for tonight's session. We will have another session in July where we're going to go through a little bit more on what delegates should understand about what you can do in the House of Delegates as far as bringing up motions, how to amend motions, how you should be, just in general, it's not just for delegates, but how even the Speaker of the House, the role of the Speaker of the House, and how you should address the Speaker and vice versa, and just different things that you as delegates can do to move forward things, how you can make amendments, how you can have things referred to a committee, how you can have things postponed indefinitely versus the term tabling something, which is incorrect. And we're going to go into all of those sort of things so that when we get to our House meeting, our House sessions, that things can be handled according to Robert's rules. And also during that session, there will be an opportunity if anyone needs any clarification on anything in the bylaws. We welcome that as part of the conversation too. Do we need to put this link in the chat?
I'm grabbing it right now.
Okay, perfect. Are there any additional comments or questions? We hope you found this session to be helpful, because Kendra and I definitely enjoyed putting it together and bringing you what we believe is information that you could use.
The link is now in the chat if you guys want to make sure you grab that. I'll give everybody a few minutes to make sure they have the link. And we hope to see you guys in July.
Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you guys.